We got yet another look at what the Miami Dolphins look like without Tua Tagovailoa as their quarterback in 2024. Offensively, this was the worst year of any year in the Mike McDaniel era. Guys like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle had their worst years career-wise. And even though defensively they had a good year, and up until week 18, they did have a chance at actually making the playoffs, but it seemed like once Tua went down with the second injury in week 17 and didn't play those last two games, I think everybody knew, including the Dolphins, there really was no chance that this team was going to make the playoffs. And that's okay. I think the Miami Dolphins for a while now, with Tua, with Mike McDaniel, with the offensive playmakers that they have put together there in Miami, they were due for a year off from really, I think, over succeeding. I think even though this team is very talented, even though schematically, this team is very smart. This team knows how to put points on the board. And defensively, they finally put it together to know how to keep points off the board on their own side of the field. But this still is a team where there's glaring holes along the offensive line, along the defensive line, and in the secondary as well. Now, diving into what the offense looked like statistically, again, this was the worst year from the Mike McDaniel era in the Miami Dolphins system. 22nd in scoring, in the bottom half of the league in almost every statistical category. They didn't run the ball very well. They let up, middle of the pack in terms of letting up sacks, middle of the pack in terms of turning the ball over. Tua Tagovailoa actually led the NFL in completion percentage, but again, only started 11 games out of the 17. Devon Achane actually had a pretty crazy year when you look at his receiving totals. A lot of that is due to playing with two backup quarterbacks, whether it was Tyler Huntley or whether it was Skylar Thompson throughout this year, who were feeding him a lot of those receptions. And again, Tyreek Hill, since his rookie year, and it's going to show on the screen that those are the worst totals that he's had since his rookie year. It's more on a reception and yards per game basis. Those were the lowest he's had in his entire career since his rookie season. His 6 touchdowns are the least he's had since his rookie season. Jalen Waddle, though, from a pure raw statistical category, all of his statistics were the worst he's had since he came into the NFL. It didn't help that I think the Miami Dolphins were expecting to get at least a little bit out of Odell Beckham Jr. from free agency last year. However, he only played in 9 games, and even in those 9 games that he played, he was ineffective, to say the least. The defense, on the other hand, I think kind of took themselves to task, and especially with Anthony Weaver as the defensive coordinator the first year he was there with his new system. They were pretty decent all around, in the top 10 in terms of scoring, total yards allowed, against the pass and against the run. The only thing they didn't do, and something that they did poorly, I think, was actually affect the quarterback. They limited yardage and they limited touchdowns and scoring, but they did not take the ball away. They did not hit the quarterback before he got the ball off. Even with Zach Sealer with a 10-sack season, there just was not many guys on this team that provided a lot of production. Rookie first-round pick Chop Robinson had a very decent year. He was in the top 10 in terms of Defensive Rookie of the Year voting, and he did well against the run and the pass. But, I mean, Jalen Ramsey had, I think, when you look at the type of career he's had, he had a somewhat down year statistically, even though when you look at his coverage numbers, it's about where he usually is. And Jordan Brooks, I mean, he is just a tackle vacuum. He's one of those guys in the NFL that's going to get 100-plus tackles, and that's a good thing. That's always good to be a guy that's always around the ball. This just was a defense that, they played very well for what they were tasked with. They were tasked with playing without Tua for basically half of the season, and they were tasked with playing with a new scheme. Like I said, Anthony Weaver, this is his first year coming over after being the defensive line coach for Baltimore for the last 3 years. I think they did a pretty good job overall. So I should preface this before I get into anything involving the Miami Dolphins offseason. The Miami Dolphins, like I'm sure you know if you're a Dolphins fan or if you just follow the NFL, you know, they have one of the worst cap situations in the NFL. Now, yes, if you go to overthecap.com, you'll be able to see that they could get at max $70 million in cap. And yes, they can do that through restructuring. They can do that through releasing some guys that wouldn't hurt their dead cap total. But, it's going to rely a lot on guys being all in for a year. And if you ask me, that's not what this year should be for the Miami Dolphins. I really hate to say it, but this is kind of the time frame when you start blowing up your roster. We've seen this team for the last 3 years, and it seems like each year they get somewhat worse. And each year that we go on here, it's not like the money gets cheaper. I mean, in 25, Tua and Tyreek, Tua makes $40 million, Tyreek makes about $30 million, but in 2026, each of those guys makes northwards of $50 million. And there's just not going to be anybody who's going to trade for that contract. And yes, you could cut him, but that's going to be even worse for your cap situation. On the defense, it looks pretty bleak as well. I mean, Bradley Chubb has a similar situation with a $29 million contract this year. Jalen Ramsey's contract goes up to $25 million in 2026. And you look at the 2026 cap for this team, they don't have a lot of guys under contract, but they still are going to be already, with the contracts that they have signed, they're going to be pretty close to that cap total for 2026. I mean, it's already projected they're going to have around $23 million in cap space in 2026. That's a pretty bad spot to be in. So I guess as far as going about talking about their offseason, I'm going to go with the perspective of they're going to make something work to get 20 to 30-ish million dollars worth of cap. They're not going to be, in that maximum 60 to 70 million dollar range. I think that's pretty unattainable. I think that's like the dream scenario, but we don't really see dream scenarios come to fruition like that. So looking at their free agent list going into 2025, it's pretty much a full roster. I mean, you have a quarterback, you have a couple running backs, you have some wide receivers, offensive linemen, D linemen. It's highlighted by guys like Kader Kuhu, Javon Holland, Terrell Dodson, who didn't play a lot this year but led the Dolphins in interceptions, Raheem Mostert, who it's a foregone conclusion that he's not coming back this year, and quarterback Tyler Huntley. That leaves a depth chart for 2025 so far that is pretty, I guess bleak is the best way to put it. We need a backup quarterback, need a backup running back. I think need some offensive linemen to kind of flesh out the interior, but I also could see, nothing happening because of how much money they already have spent on the offensive line as a total. We need some interior D linemen, and we need to anticipate a change at that safety position. So the 2025 offensive free agency goals, like I said, we need a backup quarterback badly, and one that maybe can take the keys of this offense if we just make the decision that Tua Tagovailoa, we're gonna try to find a different team for him. If that's the case, I think Drew Lock can do it for a year. I think Justin Fields could be there for a year or 2 years until they get the guy of the actual future. And if you get someone like Justin Fields, you possibly could see a future with that guy as your quarterback. But especially if you have someone like Drew Lock, it's easier to move on from Drew Lock in 2 years than it is, a higher name free agent like a Russell Wilson or an Aaron Rodgers if you try to get one of those guys. And I don't think either of those types of quarterbacks are really the attainable nor the appropriate guy to take the reins of this offense. Now, we need another running back as well, but one that's going to be cheap and not one that we're expecting to split the workload with Devon Achane. We want somebody that can come in and help lessen the workload in those tough days in October and November of the regular season. Guys like JaMychal Hasty and Dearness Johnson, I really wouldn't expect them to sign for more than $2 or $3 million for a year. And I think that's kind of the perfect situation if you're the Dolphins to hitch your wagon to. I really can't see anything happening at the wide receiver or tight end spot. A lot of what Miami is going to have to do in the offseason this year is just restructure contracts on that offensive side of the ball. And it's pretty attainable to do that, but it puts you in a pretty bleak situation at the end of those contracts because it basically just prorates the amount of their signing and roster bonuses to the end of their contract. And you just end up with more dead money at the end. And so I could also see why Miami would just rather bite the bullet now in these next 2 or 3 years and not really do any of these things. They just are in a pretty bleak situation with their cap space. And I could easily see this team just not doing a lot, filling in around the border of the roster with guys that you're not expecting much out of, but to fill your roster out with and just go from there. So for the defense, it should go without saying that there was a huge void left with the departure of Christian Wilkins. I think both from a talent standpoint, and he fit in pretty well with this team in Miami. You replace him inside this year with someone like Osa Odighizuwa, Sebastian Joseph Day, Greg Gaines, or Derek Nottie, 4 guys who could help with the pass rush as well as the running game. I would try to be in on getting any, or honestly 2 or 3 of these guys would be great. At linebacker, honestly, Jordan Brooks was the only guy to play more than 50% of the snaps on defense last year at that linebacker position, if you're talking just pure off-the-ball linebackers. So the only thing I guess I would really do is re-sign Terrell Dodson. Like I said, he played only 5 or 6 games last year, and he still led the team in interceptions. So I would be interested in re-signing Terrell Dodson, as well as Kader Kuhu. This team is going to be not bringing back Kendall Fuller next year. And the only guy on the depth chart that really played snaps in 2024 was Jalen Ramsey. So you re-sign Kuhu, and I don't think that would be super difficult to do, but it'd be important. Now at safety, it's just going to suck to lose Javon Holland. He didn't have a great year last year, but it just is going to suck because this is going to seem like years on end now where the Miami Dolphins have had those talented players that just walk away for no gain to the Dolphins roster. And with Jordan Poyer not going to be there next year, I should really think that, I guess you should really think that there's going to be 2 new safeties next year, and they're going to be on the older, cheaper side. I would think guys like Chuck Clark, Mike Edwards, and Marcus Epps would really be the guys to think of as your next safeties going forward, especially in Chuck Clark's case. He has some, Anthony Weaver wasn't the defensive coordinator when he was with Baltimore when Chuck Clark was there, but they have some familiarity in terms of scheme, in terms of, they know each other pretty well. So I wouldn't doubt if that's a signing that we see towards the beginning of free agency. Now, the draft is where I get somewhat excited because this is where the Miami Dolphins have a chance to set themselves up for the future. With their first round pick, I think this needs to be offensive line. Between Will Campbell, Tyler Booker, Kelvin Banks, or Josh Connerly, there really should be an emphasis on improving this offensive line. Again, they played fine last year, but I think it's just time to look at adding younger, cheaper talent instead of the guys that they have now. I mean, they're spending a lot of money on Teron Armstead and Austin Jackson, guys who really aren't they're not in the top of the tackles of the league. They really just aren't. And interior is where they need help as well, and that's why you highlight guys like Will Campbell or Tyler Booker, guys who could come in and instantly improve the interior of that offensive line. In day 2, I think it just needs to be Playmakers. I think at quarterback, I really see a comparison between Dylan Gabriel and Russell Wilson. I think especially with the fact that he's a left-handed quarterback, if Tua does go down during the season again, which whatever kind of injury it is, there's a chance he goes down for a couple of games during the 2025 season. There just is always that chance. And you bring in Tyler Gabriel or Dylan Gabriel instead of somebody like Skylar Thompson or Tyler Huntley, where you kind of know what you have with either of those guys. You bring in a Dylan Gabriel in the second or third round, and you just see what can happen. He played pretty well at Oregon this year, and he's had a very long, very successful college career. I would have no problem with them taking a second or third round pick on Dylan Gabriel and just seeing what they could get out of him. Otherwise, in the second and third round, it just needs to be playmakers. Whether it's, targeting a tight end like Elijah Arroyo out of Miami as a, hometown guy. You target running back like Quinshon Judkins or Trevion Henderson or Caleb Johnson or Ollie Gordon. You target a wide receiver like a Tez Johnson. You just need to add playmakers because, like I highlighted already, a lot of these contracts that Miami has right now are for aging, very high cap hit playmakers. And you just need guys that can step in the future and raise the floor of this team, because the floor of this team is actually pretty low. If the injury situation for Tua, it was even just a few weeks worse, I think this team is picking closer to number 1 in the draft than 13 like they are this year. So you just need playmakers that can help raise the floor of this team and bring a better future, because the future of this team is not very good looking. I've already said it about the Miami Dolphins. I really think this is the year they should be blowing it up. The problem is they have a hard time doing that with, the cap space that they have currently, the fact that a lot of their deals leave too much dead money on their books if they trade guys. And I just don't know who wants to hitch their wagon to any of these guys that are on the roster with the Miami Dolphins due to age, due to the high cap hit, due to the just declining performance from a lot of these guys. It sucks if you're a Miami Dolphins fan, but this is unfortunately going to just be a year where they're running back the same roster as last year, essentially, with a few differences due to draft picks or, some guys leaving. Like I said, they're probably losing Javon Holland. They're probably losing a lot of free agents this year. They have 35 free agents this year. They're going to be losing some key players. But they have some young players that they can rely on. Offensively, they have Achane. Defensively, they have Sealer. They have Chop Robinson. They have Jordan Brooks as the guy at middle linebacker to just be, like I said, a tackle vacuum. If they actually can pull off the rebuild moves, I would love to see that, because the thing is, next year, when we're talking about draft time, I think the Miami Dolphins would be a great place for somebody like Archie Manning to go as the possible future quarterback of the franchise. And they need somebody, I think, other than Tua. I think the ship has kind of run its course on this Tua era for the Miami Dolphins, and it's time to start looking at other avenues to try to make this a Super Bowl contender.